Hey everybody, welcome to the 15-minute deep dive into the 2022-23 FAFSA, which just opened October 1st of 2021. My name is MJ Sullivan. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at the lovely Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia. There's our campus and our mountains. So let's get started. Okay, so if you're saying to yourself, what is the FAFSA? I keep hearing this over and over again. It's an acronym. And it stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So yay, it's free. But you don't just use it to apply for federal financial aid. You also use it to apply for state and college financial aid. Even outside scholarships will ask for some of the information on your FAFSA sometimes. Right now it's about 100 questions. Congress is working to cut that down in the next few years, but for right now it's about 100 questions. And you don't fill it out on paper. You actually fill it out electronically, and you're going to e-sign it using a federal student aid or FSA user ID and password. Happily, there are English and Spanish versions, and you can get to the FAFSA in one of two ways. You can either go to fafsa.gov. It will redirect you to studentaid.gov / a whole bunch of other words. So fafsa.gov is kind of easier to start with. Or you could use the free My Student Aid app. Either way works. The nice thing is there is a help hotline. It's staffed during the week, during regular business hours. You can reach that at 1-800-4FED-AID, or you can go to studentaid.gov / FAFSA Help and get some assistance if you need it. So what does the FAFSA even ask? Well, it asks for some demographic information for one, like what's your name and your social security number. It asks for information about your household size, and then financial information. So for example, the 2022-23 FAFSA is going to be looking at the 2020 year income. You can also list up to 10 colleges that you want the results to go to. And if you have more than 10 colleges you want the results to go to, you can always log back into the FAFSA after it's fully processed and make corrections to it. It's really important that when you're filling out the FAFSA that you don't guess on your social security number, because the U.S. Department of Ed actually checks with the Social Security Administration behind the scenes. And if your name, date of birth, and social security number don't add up, it rejects out. So don't guess on your social security number. Go get your card. All right. So what is the whole purpose of the FAFSA? What does it do? Well, the first thing is it calculates your expected family contribution, also known as an EFC for short. And what that is it's not a real figure, it's an estimate of your family's level of financial need. And that EFC determines what kind of financial aid you're going to qualify for. So for example, if your EFC is 400, that's like saying your family can afford to contribute $400 a year to college, but that's not how much you're going to get billed from a university. It's just a theoretical number. Now, when you're filling out this FAFSA, you're going to kind of be flowing back and forth between 3 different time periods, which is why I have 3 different clocks pictured here. So just pay attention to the questions as you're going through the FAFSA. So for example, most of the questions apply to the day you're filling out the FAFSA, like your marital status or the value of any assets, checking and savings accounts. It's as of that moment, like your address. Where do you live right now? But for any tax and income data, they're looking back to 2020. And for household size and number in college, they're actually looking forward to the time you're going to be in college, the time that your FAFSA is going to be active. So just pay attention. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, 2020, the pandemic started, the recession started, my income is very different now than it was in 2020. Don't worry, use your 2020 income like the FAFSA asks, and then contact the school that you're going to go to and ask for a FAFSA adjustment based on what's happening currently. A financial aid administrator can help you with that, but you have to work with the college for that. The FAFSA wants accurate information, so don't go changing anything around. Just work with your school. Now, a lot of people will say, well, do I have to fill out the FAFSA with a parent or my parents? Just so you know, the FAFSA considers you, the student, dependent on your parent or parents and wants parent information and a parent signature unless one of the following conditions is in effect. So if you, the student, were born before January 1st of 1999, you're independent and you don't need parent information on the FAFSA. Or if any time since turning the age of 13, you were an orphan, in foster care, or a ward of the court, you're also independent. And the FAFSA is only going to want your information, you, the student. If a student is financially supporting a majority of the way, at least 50%, a child of their own, you're independent. If the student has a legal guardian as determined by a Virginia court of law, then you're also independent. We're not talking about a parent or step-parent having legal guardianship. We're talking about the court actually assigned somebody else as a legal guardian. If the student is a veteran or currently serving in active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, training, they're independent. And if the student is married, they're independent. Also, anytime after July 1st, 2021, if a school district homeless liaison classifies the student as either an unaccompanied youth who is homeless, so in other words, the student is homeless and not accompanied by a parent, or is self-supporting and at risk of being homeless, that student is also considered independent and doesn't need to provide parent information or a parent signature. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, none of those conditions apply to me, but I'm not with my parent, maybe you live with another family member and you don't have a relationship with your parents, you can request a dependency override. Now, that's up to each individual college. So if you're applying to 3 different schools, you're going to have to work with all 3 different schools. And these are for cases of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, where it's really not safe or feasible for you to be living with a parent. What you need to do is you need to submit a request for a FAFSA dependency override to each college with some proof. For example, maybe a letter from your guidance counselor or a teacher, some kind of proof the college will give you help. And then if the college determines that you should be independent, they'll update the FAFSA that you already filled out. You have to kind of force the FAFSA through without parental information in order for them to be able to correct it, right? It shouldn't take very long, less than 2 weeks, but you want to begin this process as soon as the FAFSA is forced through without parental information so that your college can then have something for you. Okay, so now that we know who needs to be filling out the FAFSA, step 1 is you need to create a federal student aid ID and password. And you do this at studentaid.gov/FSA-ID. The student needs their own ID and password, and a parent for dependent students needs one too. So you're each going to create your own. My goodness, write them down. You're going to need this many times, and trying to retrieve it's difficult. Don't create one for someone else. Create your own. Use your own email, your own cell phone number. You're going to save yourself a lot of hassles down the road if you take my advice. Now, if you're saying to yourself, oh, my parents don't have a social security number and can't get one, maybe because of their citizenship status, well, then they can't get their own FSA ID. You can get your own. But for the parent, what you're going to do on the FAFSA is you're going to fill in all zeros for the parent's social security number field when you're filling out the FAFSA. And then at the end, you're going to have to print out a FAFSA signature page, have your parents sign it, and mail it in to the address printed on the form. So they're going to physically sign a paper FAFSA signature page. But that's how you can get around that issue. After you've created your FSA user ID and password, step 2 is you need to gather any necessary documents like your social security card, people, 2020 federal income tax returns if you guys filed taxes, and bank statements. So this lady here is collecting fabric samples and colored pencils. Totally not what you need for the FAFSA, but at least she's collecting something. And then when you're in the FAFSA, if you're not using the app, if you're using the internet, you really should turn off your browser's pop-up blocker. As you fill out the FAFSA, Smart Logic may offer for you to skip some unnecessary questions. If it asks you, hey, do you want to skip this next section? You can say yes. And in the income section, you may be offered to use the IRS data retrieval tool. If you're offered that option, give it a try. What it is the tool will import your 2020 income tax data directly from the IRS database into your FAFSA, which is very convenient, and it will flag the data as accurate, which is really good. Now, not everyone is going to be able to use this feature, but if you're able to, you should use it. And this is kind of what the IRS data retrieval tool screens look like on the mobile app, just to kind of give you an idea. As you're filling out the FAFSA, it may ask you these questions like, did you file a K-1? And you're going to say, what the heck is that? Do you see that red arrow pointing at the little question mark? That's the info button. Click it. Those are the instructions and the helpful hints. Use it. Very important that you read as you go and don't skim, because all of these questions impact that FAFSA EFC. So it's important that you're filling out the FAFSA accurately. For example, it's going to ask you, did you file a Schedule 1? Many people did, because a Schedule 1 is used for additional income like unemployment compensation or business income or loss. It also has adjustments to income like student loan interest deduction and IRA deductions. The interesting thing on the FAFSA is it'll ask you, did you file a Schedule 1 in your taxes? But answer no, even if you did, if the only reason you filled it out was for, and then they'll list some reasons, for example, like unemployment compensation. This is why it's really important for you to read the directions and not rush through the FAFSA. It shouldn't take you more than half an hour at all, or maybe 40 minutes. But don't get intimidated, just read as you go. They've really tried to make it very user-friendly, believe it or not. The last step is just listing the colleges you want the results to go to, reviewing your answers, and submitting. Really, it's easy. We're not going to do a step-by-step question and answer because I'm telling you, it's not that difficult. You can do it. If you want additional information, the FSA, or Federal Student Aid channel on YouTube, has amazingly helpful videos. Just search for Federal Student Aid on YouTube. I can't even suggest enough how helpful these are. Also, their social media accounts will have some help, so go for that. Now, sometimes people will say to me, well, the FAFSA asks for parent information, but what parent am I supposed to use? So this is a really nice flow chart that's available actually on the Federal Student Aid's Twitter site. So if your parents are married to each other, you're going to report the information for both of them on the FAFSA. If your parents are not married, but they still live together, you're going to report information for both parents again. So whether they were never married or divorced or separated, if you're all in the same house together, it's both parents. But let's say your parents are not together. The question's going to say, did you live with one parent more than the other over the past 12 months? That's the parent you're going to use on the FAFSA. It's whoever you've been living with the most. And if that parent happens to be remarried, you need to include your step-parent on there. Now, occasionally someone will say, oh, I live with my parents an equal amount of time. Then, according to this flow chart, you're going to pick the parent who supported you financially the most in the past year. Same deal. If that parent is remarried, you're going to include your step-parent's information too. What about household size? Who in your family should you be including on the FAFSA? Well, you can definitely include siblings in your family size if your parents are still financially supporting them at least half of the way, even if they're not at home. And you can also include other relatives living in your household, but only if your parents are substantially financially supporting them. So more than 50%. We're going to get into some tricky FAFSA questions that come up a lot. So we just talked about which parent you use on the FAFSA. Let's see if you remember the answer to this one. So if your parents are separated or divorced and don't live together, which parent goes on the FAFSA? Do you remember? You don't have to back up. I'll just answer it. It's whichever parent you live with the majority of the time in the past year. And if that particular parent's remarried as of now, you're going to include the step-parent's information. The parent marital status is of the day you're filling out the form and not necessarily related to just your birth parents. So sometimes people will say, oh, my parents are divorced. Right, but if the parent you're living with is remarried, your parent's marital status is married. Okay. I live with one parent who is disabled and doesn't work or file taxes. What income am I supposed to list? Well, if your parent didn't work in 2020 and wasn't required to file a federal income tax return, that's okay, because there's actually an answer on the FAFSA that says didn't file taxes, and you can put 0 for income from work. Social Security Disability, SSI, is not supposed to be included on the FAFSA, so it's okay. All right, my parents are divorced. I live with my dad. Do I include his girlfriend on the FAFSA? She lives with us. That's a good one. Well, you may include her, maybe not, maybe not. But the dad's girlfriend is not your parent, so there's no girlfriend income going to be listed on that FAFSA. As a person, she might be included in the household size if she's not earning enough to support herself. So that kind of makes sense. Should I include my sister and her baby if they live with us? Oh, well, the answer's up here already, but yes. Even an unborn baby, if your legal parents are supporting your sister and the baby at least 50% and will continue to do so while you're in college. So just kind of remember the wording of the questions as you're going through the FAFSA. It's a cute baby. Okay. Am I the student independent if I'm pregnant or have a small child? Remember the answer to that? Only if you, the student, are financially supporting yourself and the child at least 50%. If you're still living in your parents' home, that's probably unlikely. Okay, let's say you're in the assets section of the FAFSA and the FAFSA asks about business value. My parents own a small business. Do we have to list the net value of the business? No, not necessarily. If your family owns at least half of the small business and there are fewer than 100 full-time or full-time equivalent employees, so it's truly a family-owned small business, then no, you don't. Moo. The FAFSA asks about investment farm value. My parents own a farm. Do we have to list the net value of it? If your family lives on the family farm and operates it, then the answer is no. Smiley face. The FAFSA asks about investments. Do we list the value of my parents' retirement accounts and the value of the home we live in? No. Smiley face. The instructions tell you right on the FAFSA, you don't list the value of the home you live in, and you don't list the total value of your retirement accounts. There's a different question about untaxed retirement contributions, though. So, on your W-2, there are codes in box 12. It could be code D, E, F, G, H, or S, and that refers to income that you had withheld from your paycheck that was untaxed that went into a retirement account. That value you do count, but don't worry, when you're in the untaxed income question of the FAFSA, it will give you step-by-step instructions on how you find this answer. What the FAFSA is trying to figure out is how much money do you really have that you could, reallocate to educational expenses. Okay. If you need help, first of all, the FAFSA instructions are really helpful. You can just read them as you go. Try not to get stressed out. But there is that help hotline, 1-800-4FED-AID. You can watch the Federal Student Aid YouTube videos or go to studentaid.gov/FAFSA Help. I know you may be thinking, this is a lot of information to take in. Well, that's why this is a YouTube video, because you can go back and read and watch. If you have questions, also, please don't be shy. Ask your guidance counselor or a financial aid professional like myself. We're here to help you. The 15-minute deep dive turned into an 18-minute deep dive, but I hope you're still awake, and good luck. You'll be fine.